Transport in the time of COVID-19, update 19th of October. Righty-ho. You can always send stuff to me there, although it doesn't always get in now because I'm not doing as much as I used to, and do go to our website for the YouTube version, which comes up about a week later. Okay, now, I put this up about an hour ago. This is from someone called Simon Evans, and it's the documents that have been released today by the government just before COP26. And there are a variety of documents about what the government is doing to get to net zero. And my understanding from it so far is that there isn't anything on demand management across everything that's, domestic and industrial fuel use and transport. And in fact, Carlton Reid has written something for Forbes saying that there isn't anything about motor traffic reduction or demand management, which is, if that is so, can you mute yourself, please? Please mute yourselves. And if that is the case, that's that's bad news. Here's something from the police in, where was it? Essex, I think. It's updates, a graphic showing updates in terms of third-party reporting to the police. It shows here 90% of the reports by cyclists for close pass. Dash cams in cars make up over half of the submissions. Pedal cyclists just under 30%, pedestrians 15%. So as a pedestrian, you can, and that includes CCTV, but you can use mobile phones. So that's a graphic about third-party reporting from one of the UK police services. There'll be more on that coming along. Here's graphic from Badvertising, who I got referred to by We Are Possible. 2/3 of large SUV sales are in urban areas. So there's a nice graphic there. That's self-explanatory. And here's a graphic from We Are Cycling UK, reducing carbon emissions. How does enabling cycling compare to switching to a renewable energy provider, retrofitting insulation, planting 10 trees? So that's quite a useful one, showing cycling as being good for greenhouse gas emission. I've mentioned the amendments that we've suggested for the police crime sentencing courts bill. That's still going through the Lords, and you can contact me if you want any information on that, or go straight to the Cycling UK website. Okay, news from Highways Magazine. Moving traffic enforcement powers, this is outside London, available from February now. This is Traffic Management Act 2004, Part 6. So head of traffic signs and street design policy at the Department of Transport told a conference this last week that once the powers are available, in principle, it will be up to local authorities to make applications to the government to take them on. So local authorities will have to apply to the government. Powers are available from February. She expects the first wave of authorities to be designated a few months after that. Yeah, the chapter, it may finally close, but not yet. That's been an ongoing story amongst us here for the last year and a half. Yeah,
If I could just clarify slightly on that, Bob.
yes. Okay, please go ahead.
Local authorities will have to apply. So it'll be a two-stage process. Local authorities will have to apply in principle to the DFT. So first of all, three-stage. First of all, the DFT will finally agree it. Then a local authority will have to apply, effectively saying we are a competent authority to do it. And the fact you may already be doing it for bus gates isn't proof that you're a competent authority. So you have to say you've got the staff, you've got enough information, and only then, as Beth has just said, then you can then apply for each location. Each location will have to have a 6-week consultation on it. So obviously the idea will be that you wrap it all up, and the mere existence of an existing TRO isn't good enough to do it. You have to apply. So even if you've got a no entry and you just want to put a camera on it, you have to apply to have a camera on it. And it'll be a 6-week consultation process. So the chapter won't be closed till you see the very first authority actually doing something. So, that probably won't be, I would guess, till at least the late summer.
Yeah.
So, and already it's slipped from December. The powers were going to be granted in December. It's now December to February. So that's without any other slippage. So just keep watching this space.
Yeah.
It's very, very slow.
You said DEFRA, Mark.
Did I? No, I didn't say DEFRA. I said DFT. Anyway, if I did, that was a misspeak. It's DFT.
Misspeak. Okay. So,
but it's slow. On. That's the key thing. Yeah.
Yeah, dragging on. Okay, this is just repeats this. This is the Young Activists Cycling to COP26, and Cycling UK are getting involved with that as well. And I also mentioned disabled people don't like colourful crossings. There's been more on that. Okay, now this is a press release today. And Will Norman says, new data shows that people cycling in London are more diverse than ever. For the first time, Black, Asian and minority ethnic Londoners are likely to have cycled in the last 12 months as white Londoners. And 1 in 5 people who don't cycle are now actively considering cycling. And you can go to the research there. Now, this is based on some research on and work on inclusiveness with cycling. It does seem to be very kind of sport oriented. It's work being done with TfL and British Cycling, who, as you know, are the governing body for cycle sport. And it's about setting up local cycling club type organizations, which is fine, but it's still sort of organized with regard to the sport and leisure rather than commuting and everyday transport use. Okay, here's the reading list again, something on just in time. I think this is time now where those of us in transport should be making the links between just in time and how many HGV drivers we actually need, and trying to create genuine resilience in the economy. And that's an example of it. Peter Cox's presentation, Manifesto for Decarbonising Transport, which seems to have gone up and disappeared. Embodied carbon in EVs, hypermobility critique from Simon Jenkins, the All-Parliamentary Parliament Group on Cycling and Walking final report, and new thing here is Carlton Reid doing a something on the future of transport and relating to how we've always had different visions of what the future would be, and it relates to autonomous vehicles and all the rest of it. More recently, interesting piece here on the origin of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK with industrialization. Rather nice little piece by Professor John Parkin here, in which he's talking about how he submitted to a review to a piece and then was then told that his review had to be reviewed before it could be published. It's a sort of rather sort of an extreme view of the nature of cycling provision and how it fits in with modern capitalism. Here's something I picked up. This is from the House of Commons Select Committee on Clean Growth from August 2019, saying the government should not aim to achieve emissions reduction simply by replacing existing vehicles with lower emissions versions. Yes, please note that. I wish they had today. And here are two bits and pieces. The last, this is again, can't read on future views of transport. And this is him today on how there isn't anything that he's picked up on demand management in the government's publications on achieving net zero. So we'll be returning to that, but it does appear to be the case, and that's very bad news for us with regard to active travel. In the UK, mentioned Leeds, all this is mentioned last week. Leeds is vision for the future. Some people from Leeds could give us a view on that if they're here. Birmingham, we mentioned the symbolic act of putting low traffic neighborhoods in the center of Birmingham. And there's an event, the Crisis of Car Culture in 21st Century Birmingham, which is on Tuesday, November the 9th. There's the link. That's going to take place in Birmingham. Obviously, you can join virtually from anywhere. And we mentioned Glasgow and Edinburgh's plans last week, and Brian said he was impressed by them. In London, there's an interesting article in the Evening Standard on waiting lists for safe space to store bikes. We have hangars in London, and there's big waiting lists for them. In addition, there's oh yes, I'll mention that, come back to it on the next slide. Yeah, the cycle training has been suspended as done by one of the main providers in London, and the union is protesting about that. And that is sad that cycle training is being cut. Because, as you know, Transport for London is in pretty dire straits financially. So we would all say bring in smart road user pricing ASAP. So that's the news on cycle training being cut back. Islington, yeah, back to the cycle parking issue. Caroline Russell, who's Green MLA and the one Green councillor in Islington, she's made and pushed through something in Islington Council saying that it should not be cheaper to park a car than a bike, but bike hangers are still £100 a year. That's to park a bike in a hangar, which isn't that secure, outside your home. You know, that's relevant for people who live in small flats, who are probably on low incomes, a lot of them, and paying £100 a year and a key deposit is pretty crap, particularly if you've got more than one bike. Interesting graphic here from Visit Camberwell. I know he's regarded as an outlier by a lot of you, but I decided to refer to him because he's pointed out that although Islington has a low level of car usage, it's because they're being used in central London. They have an increased chance of it adding to congestion. So Islington good on low levels of car ownership, but bad in terms of the congestion effects and everything else they affect because they're being used in central London. Hounslow, Chiswick High Road cycle counts after the cycle lanes went in. As you can see, they're lower at peak times because of working from home, no doubt, but are higher at inter-peak times. And here's something from We Are Possible, a graphic showing some of the evidence on how traffic filters and LTLMs are popular with residents. So you can go to that link. Yeah, here's a nice graphic with regard to a possible design for bicycle hangars. Range Rover dummy cycle storage. There's a nice concept for you. Now, on analogies, if they're involving anything with women and violence against women, I do tend to ask women about them first, and they either say yes or no. This is one which was posted by a woman, and I said, well, I'm always very careful about making these kind of analogies myself, but if it's a woman making it, okay, she's made it, and up to you to decide if it's overly extreme analogy. Telling cyclists to wear a helmet to protect themselves from cars is like telling women to dress modestly to protect themselves from sexual assault. Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but it has that element of victim blaming, and Lisa says so. And finally, cartoon from Dave Walker about close passing, what's comfortable, what's safe, where people should be, and it's a guide to where you should be when you're passing a cyclist, when you're driving. So that's that. Any questions, anybody? Any additions? Anything people want to add on?
A question about doing something from the northeast. So can't remember. Is it Robert?
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure. I've missed the last few weeks worth of ideas of beers, unfortunately. But there was a kind of win I felt that I managed to achieve up here in Newcastle. I went to see one of the local councillors, a guy called Gareth Kane, who's a cyclist and often appears on Twitter with positive views. But I went to talk to him and try to help him make a case to the council, giving him more than just the usual let's improve cycling and active travel, but made a business case based upon my Z-Move cargo bike business, and saying the infrastructure to support cargo bikes would help with our expansion and improve employment and everything else. So I gave him a commercial view about the world as well, in order to boost or support the more general attitude to improving cycling infrastructure. He's taken that completely on board and put before the council at the last council meeting a series of proposals which were accepted without any debate, unfortunately, but were accepted, so that there is a blanket desire or a instruction plan that all engineering work and cycle infrastructure design should take into account cargo bike usage by businesses, but also by the general public, which there is increasingly quite a few in and around Newcastle. I've spotted an increasing number being used around there. So I think it's possible to go and lobby in a slightly different way than perhaps we've been used to, by saying, look, it's much better, but actually there are commercial reasons for people to do that, and that kind of seems to hit home in this particular case. So I was quite pleased with
that. Anybody else?
Robert?
There's Dave, briefly, please. There's somebody else with a hand up as well.
Just to comment briefly on the CUK response to this enforcement of policing. They commented on the Fry and the Drummond's cases, which I actually did most of the research on. And it's largely due to the fact that when we went from Vosa's website and search engine to gov.uk, they completely screwed up the ability to do decent due diligence searches and checks on operators. The Vosa search system, where you're able to go and check an operator's license, how many times they've been up before the traffic commissioner, whether they've been disqualified. You could do a really quick and effective check on an operator history. And using that Vosa site, I was able to track down the entire history of the Fry family's abuse of the licensing system which led to the 2 cyclists being killed in Cornwall. And likewise, the Drummonds, the way that Mark Drummond, I think it was that a long history of being a traffic manager and such like in haulage operators, which had been closed down, banned, and various things, leading to the closure of Drummond's and the phoenixing of Drummond's by the niece, I think, Hayley Drummond, and being able to do that sort of due diligence and check on operators when you are checking out huge liabilities with non-compliant operators. That's the main one. And just a brief one, with the loss of the land bridge, having travelled on the motorways with Irish truckers, making the most of getting from Holyhead to Dover within a working day, have we seen a reduction in crashes now that we no longer have all these Irish trucks thundering down the M6 and M1?
I think somebody's going to have to research that one day. Have we got any more? I've got something I want to ask people, but have we got anything more from anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Ideally, somebody who doesn't speak a lot. I'm sure you want to. Give that a second. Well, if not, I'm going to ask a question. We've got a Conservative councillor. I'll backtrack one notch. Brighton Hove Council has decided some time ago, a couple of years ago, to stop using glyphosate weed killer on its footways and killing weeds, because the runoff, it's highly toxic, it's really bad for animals and other plants and biodiversity. We have a Conservative councillor, in fact, the lead on transport, who's now saying Brighton is the weed capital of the country. It's the biggest deterrent to people walking is the weeds on the pavement, not the parking, not the illegal parking, not the bad driving, not everything else. So I just wondered if anyone else has come across this issue, any other local authorities or anyone has come across this issue about weeds being, everyone would walk if it wasn't for the weeds.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know about with it as an excuse for why people don't walk, but the glyphosate issue, I mentioned Caroline Russell in Islington. She ran a big campaign against the use of glyphosate by Islington Council, which was successful. That's all I know about glyphosate.
But I was thinking more the issue about, rather than the glyphosate, the weeds and broken footways, whether people felt that was a. I just tweeted and said, I think this is, compared to other stuff, this is relatively trivial. If the pavement breaks up because of the weeds, that's a different matter. But just the green things growing up doesn't stop people walking. But I just wondered whether other people thought that was a valid point or whether or not.
Well, it's an excuse, but cutting back overgrown stuff is a major issue for particularly off-road cycle tracks and paths of one kind or another. Right.
Anyone else?
No, nobody seems to. Where's Brian to take us?
Brian's coming at 17. They said between 10:30 and 10 to. Lindsay, you've got your hand up.
Hello, sorry, I'm making the tea, so I don't know when we say hello. But I was just going to say about what you said. I'm in Newcastle, and they talked about getting rid of glyphosate. I haven't actually got to the bottom of whether they have. Our councillor where I live had basically commented about, because they're Lib Dem and our council is Labour, said, the weeds are disgraceful and we need to spray them and all the rest of it. But certainly there's two issues. There's weeds where weeds grow, like grassy areas and stuff like that, which the council occasionally trim back, and some people don't agree with how often it's trimmed back when you're dog walking and that sort of thing. But the weeds that grow between the pavement are entirely, I would say, around here, because the pavements are trashed by people parking on them. Do you know what I mean? So it's not the weeds causing the problem with the pavements are uneven and there are weeds, but I think it's the other way around, because when you look at areas where the roads are wide enough for the cars to park completely on the road, it isn't an issue. The weeds aren't an issue at all. So yeah, I would say that we need to stop people parking on the road and trashing the pavements, or come up with a new pavement design.
I'd agree, and that's the message I'm taking back to him. That he's a bit of no, I won't say what I think, but anyway.
Okay, I think we should move on to the next section. I don't know.
I can't see Kieran.
No, Kieran's not here. What about the other speakers on school streets?
Steve was in such a hurry to go off, he didn't tell me who it was going to be. So if you are a speaker on school streets, sorry about the not particularly normal chaos today. But if you're a speaker on school streets, can you make yourself known, please?
Claire, can you remind us who it was going to be? I think.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure, Bob. I can speak a little bit about some of the stuff that I know about up here. But yeah, sorry, I've only just managed to get on because my internet's just been flaking in and out for a couple of hours. So I'm not sure where you're up to. Have you had someone on school travel plans yet?
Not yet today, no.
And are we about to, or are they not here?
Yeah, I thought we were about to today, but Brian's not here for the next 20 minutes. So
okay.
If you've got something you can say about them, I mean, we did have it's a matter of concern, and it's been flagged up on Twitter and elsewhere. I don't know if you can say anything about it.
Well,
I'm happy to.
I mean,
but if you've got something,
sorry, Mark,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I mean, the discussion we were going to have, and yeah, sorry, I'm not sure who was coming, but basically, the discussion we were going to have is like, so if you take the problem of children walking and cycling, rather than the individual elements of like, well, you know, Living Streets have got their walk to school thing, and Sustrans have got what's the goal, and what are the best tools that we have, and what experiences have people got of those different tools? So, I mean, we could just have an open discussion now about what experience people have got of the different schemes that are in play. I could talk a little bit about school streets and what I know, but I'm not in London, where obviously a lot of them have been employed. So, yeah, I mean, we could just try and, what would be good now is just to make a list of what are all the tactics at play when it comes to children walking and cycling more in schools, and what do we know that's working better than other things. I think that would be a useful 10 minutes to have that chat if we don't have a speaker.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
I'd like to say a few things, but I'm just going to ask Claire. I'm going to have to go soon, and if Brian isn't here, can I make you co-host so that you can start admitting people? Or if your internet is flaky, maybe I'll make you anyway. But
yeah,
I've granted it to you, so there you go. But I've done a number of school travel plans, and somebody just asked, it's not a requirement for schools to have travel plans unless they're a new development, a new school, and then it's just like any other new development. I've just been clearing out my office, and I've found, you know, years and years of worth of stuff, including a lot of stuff on travel plans, and they were very big 10 to 15 years ago. Travel plans appear to have become somewhat forgotten and somewhat mainstream and forgotten at the same time, with very little teeth in there. Everyone's asked for them, but they're not really developed. And I think that same thing goes for schools. It's something that you have to do, but one of the problems for school travel plans is the disconnect between the travel plan and the local authority that then delivers stuff. So a school travel plan can say all sorts of wonderful things, but they have no powers outside the school gates. So a school can't make the council do a school street, or can't make them do anything. It can say, we will work with the council to do it. So that is, in my view, the biggest issue, is that they're separate issues, even if it's a local authority school. So just to pick up on some comments in the chat, so there's actually disagreement on whether
school travel plans are, what's the word, mandatory or not?
Well, they're not. No, they're not. That's what I'm saying. They're not mandatory for an existing school in any way. It could be a local authority policy to ask their schools to do one, but they are obviously mandatory if you're building a new school or doing an extension or anything that needs planning permission. Then you'll need to do a travel plan for that. But that's because it's a new development, not because you're a school. It'd be the same as if you were an office block or a housing development.
Yeah. Darren has made a couple of comments in the chat. Darren, I don't know if you want to speak to this. You're saying that the focus has been on bikeability with very little positive results. Darren?
Hello there.
Hiya, yeah, Darren, where are you and what's your experience of this?
Well, I'm in London, Lewisham, and I'm a cycling instructor for the next few weeks at least until the funding runs out. And I've been doing that for quite a while. So I've basically seen that, outside of bikeability, the focus has been on cycle skills for adults, some family sessions, some holiday sessions here and there with small groups. But what I've seen is that most children aren't allowed to cycle to school and from school, certainly not on their own. So unless they have an active parent who's cycling, they won't be doing that. And a lot of children don't actually have access to a bike. So unless that's provided as part of the training, they won't actually be taking part. So some councils don't provide bikes for the bikeability training. And ultimately, as far as I'm aware, in terms of the sort of percentages, we've got 1.5% to 2% of children cycling to school, and that's pretty much stayed the same for about 20 plus years. It hasn't increased despite all of the money that's been put in through bikeability. I just feel that it hasn't achieved very much. I mean, they could be taking a long-term view that these children are learning how to ride on the road, and then when they become older, they may begin to do it or have a better idea of what that means when they're driving. But it hasn't made any impact in terms of children actually cycling to school that I can see. I often go into schools that have had, bikes, pool bikes, and they're just sitting, at the back of the shed, getting dusty and rusty. They've been used for, maybe a year or two, and then whoever was running that project that may or may not have been financed by whoever, it's no longer being used. So it's all been very piecemeal as far as I can see, and not very joined up.
Thanks, Darren. And were you a bikeability instructor?
I am indeed at the moment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Beth's made some interesting comments in the chat. Beth, do you fancy just sharing a bit of that verbally? What's your background? What are you working on?
Hello. Yeah, so I'm the cycling walking officer at BCP Council, which is Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole down on the south coast. So I made a couple of points which were, can't remember now. We've got a Sustrans Bike It Plus officer in post at the moment, funded through the Capability Fund from DFT. And she's been brilliant, and we've had really good feedback from schools. She does things like scooter skills and bling your bike and all that sort of like stuff about getting kids excited about active travel. And we've had really good feedback from the schools. But as I said in the chat, it's not been in place long enough yet to really get any data about whether or not it's having a long-term impact in any way. But ideally, we'd keep that funding in place, and we'd build on that year on year. But it does need, obviously, external funding, because we can't, as a council, afford to fund that without external funding.
And Beth, sorry for interrupting, but Bike It Plus, what is it? Who funds it? Where's
so it's a Sustrans initiative. So we applied to the DFT for they called it the capability fund. It was revenue funding last year, and we were granted that specifically to employ this person through SUSTRANS, and we've been successful in getting another grant so that we can continue to keep our officer on and actually get a second one as well, so we can do double the number of schools. But we've got 96 schools, I think, in our area, and that will only cover us to do I think it's about 15 or 16 schools. So, you know, we need more.
And is that scheme basically paying for an officer who just works with schools to say, what do you need, or what?
Yeah, essentially. So she's full-time, and she basically works with a few nominated schools that we picked sort of for her as feeling like they needed some help, or they've been asking for help from us to encourage active travel. And she essentially, it's a very flexible scheme. There's no kind of fixed thing that the bike officers do, but I mean, they kind of speak to the schools and find out what they need, and they adapt the program to suit the schools. I think it's really, really good.
And so your perception is that, or your knowledge, that actually it doesn't take much more than that to make some change. It may not be like, you know, fully get everyone in the school walking and cycling, but actually that is making impact because that's filling a gap that the schools don't have. Is that?
I think from the council's point of view, it's great because it's building a relationship that we just don't have time or resource to do as sort of fully like full-time employed officers. I'd love to be able to do it, but we just don't. But because it's not a long-term position, you know, we're always, well, yeah, as Darren's just said, the funding only lasts for so long, and then it kind of moves on. And so I'm concerned that it will sort of, you know, once the bike officer moves on to another school or goes completely, then you lose that relationship. I think the hope is that, so with one of our schools, the bike officer actually knows the deputy head who's in charge of the curriculum, and they've worked together to actually weave cycling and active travel into their curriculum. So they're doing stuff in their PSHE lessons and in like maths and English, and they're like weaving it in, and that's changing their curriculum, which hopefully then the school will be able to take forward in future years as well, even if we don't have the bike officer in there. So that could potentially be a longer term benefit. But it's such a complex, and we're starting from such a low baseline that it's almost overwhelming as in how much we need to do. And it's a combination of sort of this behavior change and encouragement. But at the end of the day, if the roads are still dangerous, then parents still aren't going to send their kids to school by bike.
Yeah, because that's what I'm wondering, what this officer's mainly doing. Is it about providing, it depends on each school?
Yeah, it depends on the school. So some schools that have got reasonably good infrastructure leading to them, like she might do different things with them than in an area where the infrastructure isn't so good.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, and also it depends on the sort of demographic of the school, because she's reported that, you know, there are kids basically that don't have anything. You know, they don't have a bike, they don't have a scooter, they don't have very interested parents. You know, each school is very different, and so that's why tailor making the sort of program is really important, I think.
Okay, so Adrian, happy to offer a view from Wokingham on this.
Yeah, I thought
hear it, Adrian.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I thought I would, because we've been talking with our local council at length about this. Council is currently producing an LC whip, but has had a bit of a blind spot on school travel in terms of infrastructure planning. And a number of our schools sit in islands of pretty busy roads, where no matter how good a cyclist or how enthusiastic a cyclist a child is, they're just simply not going to get to the school with the current infrastructure. And we're pretty good on many of the sort of behavioural and enabling issues apart from infrastructure. We apparently have sort of class-leading levels of bikeability passing in England. all the schools have got green plans, a number of them have got awards for it. But when the council asked them last year who'd like to take part in a school streets trial, they all just threw their hands up in horror and said, we're far too busy. We need you to do this for us. And of course, nothing's happened as a result. The council recently decided to produce its own school travel plans by producing a map of the borough showing where it thought was safe walking and cycling routes, which resulted in howls of derision from a number of people, because it included, in some cases, sort of national speed limit, single lane roads with no pavement, which a number of adult cyclists wouldn't even use, let alone school children. So we come up against this problem where the real enabler and the hard enabler is going to be infrastructure, and that's way beyond the ability of a school to take on. So what we've asked the council to do as a priority after we've done the current round of LCWIP planning, which we're helping them with, we run a community action group in the area on this, and we're helping them with the LCWIP, and that relationship's going quite well, is to move on to school travel next. And start with some pilot schools and do a proper school travel plan that includes infrastructure and interventions in the infrastructure based on where the catchment area for the school is. And we're hoping that will make a difference. I don't think there's any shortages of schools that would like to do this. They just simply don't have the capacity to take it on beyond things they can do with their pupils. And if that works well, hopefully, we can incorporate some school streets as a part of that, and then have a model to flow out further. But I think that's the obstacle in our area. It's actually resource and expertise from the council outside of the immediate vicinity of the school that's the problem.
Does Adrian's experience chime with anyone else?
I think Adam's had his hand up for a bit.
Thanks for spotting that, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to say that locally, Baines went with mode shift stars. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. And that has enabled sort of like allowing different gradings on schools and their behavior. So almost like not trying to game the system, but there are a couple of schools which have got like the gold standard award from that. But it provides a framework for supporting schools trying to do travel plans and such like. So I'm wondering, if one of the problems is that a lot of times, where do they start? How much officer time is needed to educate and kind of teach schools how to go about doing this type of stuff, getting them thinking about this space? Because I think, you've got to take these schools on a journey. If you're getting a school that's got to a gold standard or gold mode shift stars gold award, then the next thing you could probably do is start talking to them about school streets. But they have to be in that framework where I think the head teacher is on board. They're already started those conversations. They're moving people or moving kids to be, and their parents particularly, to start thinking about how they get to school, and then allow that sort of kind of snowball into other areas. Yeah.
And point of order, Adam, stars. It's a London scheme, isn't it?
No, mode shift stars is a national scheme.
Definitely national. Yeah.
Okay, so
Claire, I've got to go, so I'm handing over to you. You'll have to let people in as well, and anyone comes. I'm sorry, I don't know where Brian. I've just texted Brian, and I've got no idea where he's got to.
So,
see ya.
So can any school sign up?
Thanks,
is that assuming that it's not just me that doesn't know how this works on this call?
My understanding is that it should be driven by your council, or at least have somebody who's involved in that space. But it does provide a framework for allowing schools to effectively compare each other within that. I don't know if it's comparison, but it just allows them to kind of work within a framework. I mean, I'll post the link in the comments to the actual website.
And Megan's posted a few comments in the chat, and I'm sure Megan's got lots to add to this.
Just that I believe that Mode Shift Stars now has DFT funding. So I think that any school can register for free. But, just to echo what Beth wrote in the comments and what Adam just said is, schools, it does take quite a bit of time. So one of my Sustrans colleagues has become a volunteer at her kids' school, kind of leading on environmental issues as a whole, but because she's, she only works part-time for Sestra, she has a bit of time that she can put into actually progressing some of this stuff. One of the things that we certainly find, and school travel officers at different councils I've spoken to have also found, is, it relies on having a person, a keen, committed person who's going to take a lead on it. And it's great when you find them as a member of staff, but members of staff do move on. I think what a lot of schools don't have, at least not in the area where I'm working, is very many, I think, parents who are maybe happy to pick this up and push it. And I think there is more scope to have involvement kind of from the wider community to work through an action plan, be there as the champion, start in year R, and therefore you're likely to be there for 7 years, whereas that might not be true for a member of staff who gets this taken on. So, I think there is an opportunity to get more involved, particularly in your kid's school where, that you've got a sense of ownership already.
So I'm sure this chimes with other people's experience, but do speak up if it doesn't, or even if it does. But basically what Megan's saying is that, and what other people have said, the sum total of that is that there's this gap, that if you haven't got teachers in the school that really care and make time for it, and you haven't got some sort of funded role in your in the council that often is short term and then finishes, then there's a gap. And I think the other thing I would add is that reliance on parents filling that gap means that you're probably only going to get this working in areas where perhaps are more affluent. And I've certainly come across this in Manchester, where we've been working in Manchester, and I might speak more about this in a minute when others have spoken, but it shouldn't be reliant on schools with wealthy parents who've got the time to make this happen, should it? So that's the danger of relying on volunteers. Nicola, you've made a comment in the chat. Would you like to offer any perspective on this?
You've put me a bit on the spot.
Don't want to, so you can say no, and just say no, my comment in the chat's fine.
Just say what you said in the chat.
Well, that's exactly it. The working at a London borough, and we had a separate team that was very engaged with the STARS programme, worked very hard with all of the soft measures in schools, with the a free breakfast for those that cycled and bling your bike and all of that. But I think it's been said before by my previous colleague in this same authority, it's limited. Once the momentum, a teacher moves on, the momentum dies away because the roads that get to the school are not safe to cycle on. But without the counsellors keen to make a change, nothing, and without the engagement of the neighbourhood, the parents and the staff, once the bling your bike day is gone, the blinged bikes stay in the shed. So it's key for the engagement with the counsellors to bring about change. But unfortunately, as hard as I know that counsellors work, and that's a very on-topic subject this week, as hard as they work, they respond most to those who shout the loudest, and that tends not to be the cyclists.
Or indeed the children who don't have any.
Or the children that maybe are voiceless. Exactly. So it comes back to the parents and the teachers who are interested. And
I think, one thing to
remind. Thanks, Nicola, and that was really. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. I'm sorry, Bob. Do you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, this whole thing about, for example, the stuff in the chat about bike buses, and my experience of bike buses is that Yeah, you can get them, but it needs this enormous amount of effort from parents, from a school champion, etc., etc. Occasionally you get them going, but then people leave and there's nothing permanent. So, I mean, I'd say a general thing about school travel plans and my experience of working with school travel plan officers, school travel officers, is that put an enormous amount of work in. Don't forget, school teachers are always rushing around, difficult to get hold of, under stress, you know, like all council officers, police officers and others, even more so nowadays. And they try and do things, but it's an enormous amount of effort. I think the whole school travel movement was kind of brought in around the turn of the century because someone in DFT noticed that a lot of rush hour traffic is people driving kids to school and thought, oh, good. If we don't get them to drive to school, and if we can get the kids to walk or cycle, we will reduce congestion. So all this was rolled out. You'd have one, maybe two officers in each council, and a lot of work, a lot of pushes, and it never really sticks. It never really gets anywhere because of the problems with infrastructure. And I think we were hoping that with school streets, if they're implemented properly, if they're at all schools, if they deal with infrastructure in tricky situations, and they're not just some of the ones which we've shown here, which are in locations where it's easy to implement them, then yeah, you're going to get change. But until you have that kind of forceful change, and it would involve a variety of restrictions on driving to school.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Better.
Megan, have you left your hand up, or did you want to come back on a point?
Muted. You're muted, Megan.
Sorry, I accidentally pressed the wrong button and then got all flustered.
Cool.
It was a new one because so one of the local authorities I'm working with does continue to ask for school travel census data, which is essentially just at the start of the year, hey, how does your, parent, in addition to, your emergency contact info and can we take photos, how do you normally travel to school? So I took all of that data. It turns out they've never actually looked at it like by setting, which is a bit weird. But I then looked at between primary and secondary school and whether it's considered urban, rural, or mixed, somewhere in between rural and urban. What's the active travel percent? And almost all of over 80% of the urban primary schools, and this is within a county council, this isn't in the middle of like a London borough, were reporting at least 50% of their kids were traveling actively. About 50% of those urban primary schools had over 70% of their kids traveling actively. Even in kind of the mixed areas, so more of like a suburban setting, they still had about 45% of their kids, 45% of those types of schools, they had over 50% traveling actively. I think one of the things that's really important to remember is how many kids are walking. And if you're trying to show that there's public support, if you're trying to show that actually there is a momentum behind this, particularly if you're in a more suburban or built up area, if you can get hold of these stats, most families are still walking to school. They may be bringing a scooter, they may be bringing a bike, but I think that's a really powerful thing that can be sometimes easy to overlook when we're talking about cycling. But then it allows us to maybe have bigger discussions about, well, if most kids are walking, what should the streets look like outside the school gate? What should the route to school look like? What should our crossings look like? A lot of stuff that would benefit kids doing more cycling as well, but it broadens that audience that we can work with.
I think that's a really good point about walking. And yeah, I have seen all the data that clearly shows. I mean, so Darren mentioned it's like 1.5%, 2% cycling. It's way more than that for walking, like 20% or something. Does anyone have experience of working with the Living Streets Walk to School Week, is it called? WOW, and the program that they've got? Because I haven't directly, and I don't know whether this is where I know they've lost some funding recently, so I don't know if it was that, but certainly when you look on their website, they make a big play of this and what they're doing with schools, and there's this interactive whiteboard. And has anyone got any experience of that? Does it work? Is it being adopted? Anyone know? Oh, interesting. Quite cycle heavy, this group. Andrew, you had your hand up earlier, so do you want to come in? It may not be answering my walking.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I was just going to say as well, just to echo what people were saying before, that I think, you know, getting the kind of the head teacher involved and getting the school supported of the school street is really important. I know there's a couple of schools that, well, the head teacher, you know, they see their job just to obviously educate the children, and, you know, obviously what goes on outside the school gates, they try not to get involved with. And I think especially in some of the poor areas, when you're trying to, you know, just get the kids to turn up to schools, and even with the parents, you know, obviously driving them to schools, it's so hard to try and then tell I think then try and tell the parents you shouldn't be parking outside the schools. And I think it's a discussion that needs to be had, and I think that the heads do need to lead it. But I think a lot of the heads are resident to actually start telling, you know, parents to you know, stop driving to school, because obviously it's putting up more barriers between them and the parents. But yeah, I think it's definitely, school streets are definitely going to be a good thing. With Living Streets, we did trial a walk to school with Living Streets. So I think they are still doing the WOW once a week with the schools, and it is free for I think in Greater Manchester, TFGM do fund a number of schools or for the Living Streets walks once a week. So it is quite well used, which is good.
It just from looking at their website, it kind of seemed to be quite similar to the Mode Shift Stars thing. So kind of,
yeah. Just with Mode Shift Stars is obviously it's based on accreditation that schools can get to show that they're actually making inroads into active travel. And actually, Mode Shift Stars and Living Streets actually do connect. So if as a school you were to sign up to Living Streets walks once a week, basically if the children's walk once a week and they record it kind of daily how they get to school. If they walk once a week for a month, they get a badge, and all the stats that they put in it online actually go towards automatically are shared with Mode Shift Stars as well. So as part of Mode Shift Stars, you know, when they have to do kind of like travel counts and travel surveys, it's actually already done through Living Streets, which is really helpful and really resourceful, which is good.
Oh, that's really interesting, Andrew. Any more on either of those two schemes? Otherwise, I'd like to hear a bit about school streets. And when I'm talking about school streets, I'm talking about the whole gamut, because I think what I've found is there's it's a phrase that can be used to describe a lot of things, can be used to describe a whole scheme with ANPR cameras, and it's all magically automatic, and it can be used to describe a couple of keen parents standing up in high vis with a sign once a month or less. So all of those things are included in the banner of school streets. It'd be good to hear about people's experiences of that. Anyone worked on one? Anyone brought one to their school, their neighbourhood? I can't see all the hands. So if you want to speak, just shout up. Bex, got you on mute at the moment.
Sorry. Yeah, we've got one locally. I actually live about 3 streets away from it. I'm also a parish councillor, so I'm involved.
And where's that, Bex?
Sorry, Cheltenham. Involved from that side of it as well. From the parents' point of view, it seems to have been going well. I've been round. Sorry, can you not jump on the bed? Thank you. I've been round a few times whilst it's been running. My kids don't go to the particular school, so been round and had a look, and it seems to be going well. We've had complaints from.
Sorry, and just where is it on that spectrum of
it's
magic automated thing to
we've got
standing up
signs at the end of the road. It's a cul-de-sac. We've got big signs at the end of the cul-de-sac, and there's no like cameras or anything like that, but they have sent round officers to ticket cars that are where they shouldn't be and things like that. There's limited parking on the adjoining streets as well, within school hours, but that's not signed as clearly, I don't think. Some of the people in the cul-de-sac have complained that it has limited their access in and out, but I struggle to see how that's the case when they've got passes to go in and out, and they've got, you know, they can have deliveries, things like that still come in. But so that's been a bit of a contention with the parish council. They've been sort of complaining to us, asking us what we can do about it, which is not a lot because there's still 6 months to go on the trial. It has added extra traffic to nearby streets, but not a vast amount. And like I say, I'm a couple of streets away. We're actually between 2 schools on our street, and they do come and park in our street to walk the kids around, and it doesn't feel like it's a lot. It's, you know, a few extra cars each day. So yeah, I mean, overall it seems like a success, but it's just the neighbours very close to it that seem to not be happy with it.
And Bex, in your role as councillor, has that been to champion and get this scheme through?
This actually happened before. I've only been parish councillor a few months, and it was one of the councillors before who, one of the borough councillors, he got it, he championed it, well, a couple of them championed it and got it through. But I don't know if anybody else has had experience of nearby residents being unhappy with it, and if you found a way to get around it. But yeah, we're all at a bit of a loss as to what to do, really, because it seems like it's fair and set up well, but I don't know.
And as you say, Bex, so in this scheme, what you're saying is, and a lot of school streets, basically the restrictions are only for that hour pick up and drop off, but also anyone who's a resident or needs access gets a pass, right?
Yeah, I think they have, like I said, I think deliveries can come through, the post can come through, any residents can come through. I mean, when I've been around there having a look at it, there were cars driving up and down. There was nobody stopping them, but they were driving very slowly with their hazards on. There was only like 1 or 2 each time that I've been around there. So it does seem that it is open for access for those that need it. I think they have had councillors, parents, when it first got put in, stood at the end of the road, stopping cars and asking them, you know, if they were, what they were doing. So I don't know whether it was at the start there was issues with people not getting through who should have been allowed through. But like I say, I've only been in this role a few months, so I'm not sure what went before.
And in terms of Bex's call to the group, has anyone got any thoughts on how to handle some of that criticism? Anyone got any experience of that they'd like to share? If not, I'll move on to the next point. Can't see hands, so if you want to speak, just jump in. Okay, so Shane has said in the chat, school streets still need the same champions among parents and staff, so how do we create champions? And at this point, I might just share a bit about the scheme that I've been working on in Manchester, which is a lottery funded project in Chorlton, where I live. And we've been working on a number of things, but one of them is that we've created a school champions network. And what we found was there was a lot of parents at individual schools who were like, oh, I want to do something about the school run, but they felt a bit isolated. So there were different things happening. There was, one of the schools were already doing a school bus, and one of the other schools every now and again did a street closure, a school street, but in one of those, parents just volunteering things. And so one of the things we've done is created through this project, we've been able to facilitate creating a network of parents and teachers who feel the same at different schools in the neighborhood. And it sounds really simple, but I think the people in that group, so they now talk about themselves as school champions, and they see themselves, wanting to support this move to walking and cycling. But crucially, they've got a bit of a network to draw on, and it does include people who are on the PTA, and often the PTAs are talked about, Parent Teachers Association are talked about by head teachers. They can be the thing that fills that gap sometimes between, when there's no resource in the council or in the school. And so, I just wanted to share that as an example, really, that, that's something that perhaps could be facilitated by people like us in the sort of championing and campaigning type roles that we have, or whatever role that you've got. Just linking people up can sometimes have more of an effect than you realise. And as a result of that, we ran a school street week in Chorlton, where, where we, where several schools worked together and ran a school street week. And, it was still one of the examples of, it was a temporary thing, it's not there permanently. But what that's done is created a bit more political will in our councillors, and a bit who are already supportive, by the way, but perhaps just continuing that momentum towards trying to get a permanent school street, which I don't think there's enough understanding, and I think we could do a better job of articulating the kind of the journey, the point of running, say, a temporary school street once a month, where if you have got parents who are willing to do it, to stand on a street and close a street for an hour in the morning and the afternoon. One of the reasons for doing that is it starts to just get everyone used to it. Maybe you can get your councillors knowing about it, share pictures, and then what's happened in GM is there now is a little bit of funding so schools can apply. And one of the schools that was involved in our school street week is now getting some of that funding. So I just think we could do a better job of showing that journey from standing as a volunteer on a street to how that can end up with a kind of permanent street closure. And one of the things that hasn't been talked about tonight so far is about the enforcement powers. So as I understand it at the moment, in London and Cardiff, we can use ANPR cameras because the money goes back to the councils. And at the moment outside London and Cardiff, that's not the case. But from the end of this year, which will probably be late because everything else with this government is, that local councils outside those areas will get the powers to do that. So I don't know if anyone could speak to that. I don't know if Megan is still on, whether she knows more about that from the Sustrans perspective. But it seems like key opportunity here that councils outside of London are going to get more ability to enact permanent school streets than they currently have.
Sorry, I've moved on to the dinner making portion of my evening. So as far as I know, and I'm not the best person at sessions because I don't have regular kind of catch-ups with the DFT. But yeah, as far as I know, that's going to come in. I guess the concern that I've heard from councils is just that ANPR is going to be pricey. And so I think some local authorities are super keen because maybe they're already doing school streets and they see that this is like the next best step. But I think other local authorities are having a look and trying to get a feel for all of the options available to them. So in Southampton, for instance, there's 2 schools that use drop bollards that are just put up and down by the caretaker. So it means that it's a much smaller school street, but it means that it's one that was fairly inexpensive to install, because it is, it is just fairly simple bollards. And it means that the school can continue to resource it because it's the caretaker going out for 2 minutes rather than 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's quite a few places that are kind of, they don't want to rush in to some, they don't want to overpromise something like ANPR, because what that might end up doing is drastically reducing the number of schools that they can work with, just because of the cost involved in, the electrics and the cameras and stuff like that. But, so I think
that's really useful.
One of the options.
Yeah. Anyone else want to come on this? Otherwise, I've got a big question for everyone, which is, so do school streets actually achieve the goal of, it seemed like the big question at the start of the chat was, well, problem with bikeability is the streets are still dangerous. So does school streets make the streets less dangerous, and does it increase people walking or cycling, and particularly walking, given that if we double cycling, we're only getting to like 3%. If double walking, that's a massive impact. So sorry, 2 questions there. One is, anyone else got anything to add on school streets experience?
I was just going to ask, I know that there's a lot of ex or current local authority professionals here. I don't know if Toby Jacobs had anything to say from his experience, particularly with regard to cycle training. Anything you want to say, Toby?
Not particularly with respect to cycle training, but with respect to school streets. I think in the borough I used to work for, the policy became that all schools would have a school street, and the need was to opt out of the program rather than having, like, say, local champions who were fighting to have a school street in one school. It became the blanket policy of the borough.
Yeah.
Which borough was that, Toby?
Hackney.
Yeah, which is probably about probably more school streets than any other council in
every school should have a school street is the policy there. But the thing, I think Bob mentioned it earlier on, this thing about having champions who get, say, a cycling bus going or something of that sort, but then people move house or fade away, or this or that happens, and it doesn't remain. It's really important that it's embedded in policy. And now, after some time with all of this, my thinking is that's the stuff to campaign for, is to get it embedded in policy, and then it has to be at the budget meeting of full council, and it's resourced, and it's part of the capital program. It's what they're doing. It's not like one thing that's happening at one school because somebody really shouted and made it happen, which is, not to denigrate that in any way at all. That's what has to happen to raise awareness. But the real key thing is to get it embedded in policy. That's what I'd say.
And do you have a policy you can share, Toby?
What do you mean?
Well,
I'm not a council officer anymore, so no. my general thing would be that there should be a timed school street outside every school, unless there would be exceptions. Obviously, there are places where it may be inappropriate for all sorts of very specific reasons, but as a general principle, the space around schools should be as traffic free as possible during the school time. Yeah. And then if schools wish to opt out, or local people want to campaign to opt out the school, fair enough. Let them make a case for it. There may well be a case in some cases.
Yeah, schools on main roads. So it's 6:23 now, and I thought we'd finish at maybe 6:30. Does anyone want to come in on that point? I mean, it's a great one. So, as a lot of us on here are campaigners, I mean, we Walk Ride, we put this in our hustings for the mayor in May that, every school in GM 2000 or whatever should have a school street. but ultimately it comes down to the boroughs rather than the GM level. So yeah, has anyone got anything to say on Toby's suggestion?
I'll say something if you want.
Thanks, Bev.
Claire. Yeah, so I'm obviously coming from a council officer perspective, and I completely agree. I mean, that's the dream, isn't it, really? I think it would definitely have a benefit, although obviously walking and cycling to school does involve a journey longer than just that street. I think it can get people thinking about it, it's that nudge factor. And also it takes away that concentration of danger and pollution and everything right outside the school gates. So I think it's great. Funding, it all comes down to funding. Councils, the government has been very good, she says cautiously, about throwing capital funding at councils. So that's one-off funding pots for putting in physical infrastructure. But revenue funding is where councils are really, really struggling. Revenue funding has been cut and cut and cut over the years, and we've got nothing, like literally for day-to-day maintenance and running of schemes and initiatives like school streets. We've got nothing, and that's where it's really, really difficult. AMPR could help us if we can make it pay for itself. That could work, but at the same time, if it's paying for itself, that means vehicles are going through, and if vehicles are going through, then it's not a very good school street, so therefore it's not paying.
Yes, but
yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
so what you really need is physical barriers. If you've got physical barriers, then you have the issues of what about the residents that live in that street if they then can't get out, if they need to get out of their cars, if disabled residents can't get in and out. So you need barriers that can be dropped. Then you get into, well, you need to either have stewards there day in, day out to manage those barriers. Unless you have, the automatic ones where you have a permit and then it automatically goes down, but then that's really expensive to install and to maintain. So there's so many, I don't want to put a downer on it, because I think, we ultimately do need these school streets, but I can't stress enough how much councils are struggling with revenue funding.
And remind us which council you're at, Beth, unless you don't want to, in which case.
Well, no, I mentioned it earlier. So it's BCP Council down on the south coast, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole.
Yeah. Toby, do you want it to come back?
I just wanted to say I completely agree with Beth's point about the revenue funding, and even in London, where we're blessed with the TfL ferry, who shower what money they have upon us, revenue funding is a problem. And we build lots of stuff, and then the ongoing costs are, have to be met in some way, and that can be quite difficult. And just to go back, the jumping off point on this was something to do with, is this stuff effective? Which I think is how what Robert was talking about with respect to cycle training, because I have a background in cycle training, so he knows that before I became involved directly in the council. So the answer to the school street thing is I think I would describe it as a lower level intervention. It's not a sort of really high level intervention like a row of bollards is, for example, permanent bollards or traffic redirection, these sorts of things. Segregated routes, perhaps, like it's one of those things that's good to have. There's a need for access on those streets for vehicles, so there should be a control measure there for the school time. That's sort of all it is, in a sense. So it's important not to oversell it. It's just a sensible approach to sharing that space, as opposed to a free-for-all approach, which is not as sensible.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I look at that. So I don't see it as like a sort of a great instrument of change, in a sense, because it's just doing a simple, rational, correct job. The priority should be the movement of children outside that school at that time, right? That's correct. So it's just a little bit of rebalancing, right? But you've seen with the low traffic neighborhoods and stuff. I mean, you close a couple of streets and people completely lose their minds, right? So it gets a bit overblown for what it actually is sometimes.
Sounded like Bex's experience from
it's not that there aren't problems and things that people have issues with. That's all real enough. People have their feelings and their experiences, and that's fine. But it is just they're quite low level measures, really. They're not major measures.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Robert's posted something in the chat, but it looks like it's going to take us onto a slightly new topic. So I'm going to come to Shane first, who's got his hand up.
Hi, Claire. I just wanted to tie in something together with enforcement and school streets and bikeability. And I understand that enforcement is kind of the last thing on the list, that we should be looking for bollards and infrastructure. But one of the things that people miss about cycle training in places like the Netherlands or Austria or Germany, which you look to as examples, is that for many years, it was the police who conducted bikeability with children in the schools. And it was a police function to teach the kids their road cycling skills. It is still a police function in places like Austria and Germany. It's been dropped in the Netherlands. But that created a culture within the police, I would argue, or it could have created a culture within the police where they would take things like enforcing school streets seriously, and where they would take things like making sure kids' cycle lanes and things like that weren't being blocked by motorists. So, you know, that is something. If we need an official culture to come from somewhere, that might be one way of achieving it, is if we could somehow get the police involved in cycle training. Now, they will throw their hands up at the idea, but maybe it's something to think about, is where did the Dutch culture come from, or the Dutch police culture, or the Austrian police culture come from originally? So.
Interesting. Does anyone want to come back on to Shane on that? Megan, I'm suspecting your point was different, so might just see if anyone wants to
just one comment. I was cycling back from town this afternoon, and for the first time ever in Newcastle, I've seen a policeman on a bicycle, and I followed him down one of the new pop-up cycle lanes that's gone down outside the RVI. But the first time ever. I did remark to him at the time. He said, well, he made a wise comment, but not repeatable here. It's quite funny. But I think again, the police thing for me would be great. I would love to see more police out of their cars and on bikes, because I think in an overall sense, they get a better appreciation of what's going on from a traffic management point of view and a travel point of view, but also from a general purpose, be seen, be useful, be aware. But we've got other problems in the police, haven't we? So
yeah. Just on the police, and then maybe I'll come to Megan for the final point, as I think be good to wrap up. But is the like, I don't know, other people on the call, you may have done the speed awareness test rather than pay a fine, and I was just struck by there's actually a really quality course. Loads of stuff in there that's not part of the driving test that probably should be, about awareness of other road users and awareness of speed, and so yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure when I did my cycle proficiency test when I was very young, that the police were involved. Anyway, Megan, your point.
Yeah, just I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but I was talking about kind of where you put your time and effort, particularly if you're a campaigner. And so I think the point on impact of school streets isn't necessarily one about, is it going to achieve mode shift? But I think in terms of showing that public support, having an event and a place that you can get counsellors to get a photo of them smiling with nice children and that sort of thing, I think it does seem to work. Generally, the ones that I've seen, there's usually broad support from residents and from the school community. So I think to make that broader case, it helps by, there's a reason why in the Netherlands they focused on child deaths and why that grabbed people. It's an emotive subject. And I do think that school streets can help to capture some of that emotion about, it is the right and correct thing to do. And yet we seem to take it for granted. And I think that can help to maybe change the conversation more widely.
I think that's a great final thought. And so, I mean, I've made some notes. I think we've made some really interesting points, and what I find on this topic is that people want to talk about school streets or bikeability or school travel plans, and actually what we're trying to do with this chat is like, well, the problem is, how do you get more kids to walk and cycle safely? And I think we've actually covered the full territory there and got lots of questions, not necessarily answers, but that's unusual in this space. So I think that's really interesting.